that you have in the program in your badge. This year we have 55 sponsors that joined the meeting. And during the day I have been listing some of them. Right now, I will mention other sponsors as Lógica, Banco de Bogotá, Banco de Occidente, BBVA Seguros, BDEO, Berkeley Insurance Company, CMR Consulting Services, CMR Consulting Services, and Colmena Insurance Company. The insurance market needs to have a prospective vision of risks that must be faced as an industry and to analyze challenges to offer efficient solutions. To talk about this topic, we invite the Director of Reinsurance for Latin America of Swiss Re, Mr. Florian Kummer. Welcome. Thank you, everyone. Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. For the organizers, Fasecolda, thank you very much for the opportunity of being able to talk here and to talk about the Swiss Re perspective and the emerging risks. I'm not going to talk about the current risk profile, showing the balance and the sector, but I'm going to talk about tomorrow's risks. And the way I want to do it is to talk about the relevance of this topic, how are we organized vis-a-vis emerging risks, the methodology, the publications we have, and also to provide some examples, the overview in 2018, how do we see the global risk map, and to provide some examples. But I would like to start with these symbols. I do not know if you acknowledge them to see, I think you will know one or the other. Here on the top, this is Instagram. Uber, I think the Uber icon changed. It's Uber. The green robot, it's Android. Then we have iPhone, smartphone in the middle. On the other side, you know everything. Netflix, iCloud, CrossFit, and what all of this has in common, the social, what is the common denominator? 10 years ago, they didn't exist. 10 years ago. And this really talks about the importance aspect of these topics. We are in an extremely changing environment with many changes, transformations. 10 years ago, we had the first smartphone, iPhone. I purchased one at that time. But then you can see the speed of change. The speed of change on one hand and the depth of the change. The environment change, and that there is an influence with respect to risks for the sector. And I think it's important to look at the speed and the depth. Speed, because many times as human beings, we have the feeling of stability. But in fact, the world has changed so radically and so rapidly. It has never changed as in this generation. And the depth, because these technologies or these social networks are not specific, but it's on a day-to-day basis. Millions of people are exposed to these, they use it, and it's a huge change. And that is why this topic is so relevant. The risk is changing because our environment is changing. So I want to give you the Swiss Re perspective. I would like to talk about macro trends that we see as a company, a more structure, more than the symbols that we saw here. How do we define the emerging risks? How are we organized as a company? We have a department, we have a group of people working with those risks. We have a methodology, we have a publication called Sonar, and it is an annual publication. It was published in May this year, and if you go to the web page, you can download it if you want, if you are interested in the topic. And I'm going to give you in 2018 an overview as Swiss Re sees the tomorrow's risks with respect to the potential impact, with respect to the time horizon. This is a short term and mid-term, and how it affects the sector, how it will affect an insurance company, in which area. Usually in the portfolios, whether properties or life, or whether on the other side of the balance sheet in the financial investment, or it will affect operation of an insurance company. We're talking about varied risks that have a different impact in different area in an insurance company and in the sector. And at the end, if I have time, I will give you some examples. Well, allow me to start with the macro trends that we see. We started with the digital revolution, the technological revolution. We will have to talk about these. We are in a digital time. Really, it's penetrating the economy and society, the production, whether distribution, consumption, the impact, the visible impact, and we know it because it's important. It's not stable. There is a dynamic, a disruptive, and continuous dynamics. Obviously, it is a huge factor when we talk about emerging risks. The risks, the cybernetic risks, are the most important risk. We are in a time where we have climate change and nature is changing. There are some implications for tomorrow's risk. The green part here. If we go up on the political environment, there were many changes lately. The scenario is less stable. We have multilateral organizations, we have new stakeholders, we have populism. The world is changing at this level as well in the political environment. Now societies, I could talk a lot about this, but just we have a middle class, growing middle class in emerging countries. We have a demographic trend, longevity, the population is older, we have more people, more older people, and that has a risk implication. We have medical issues as well, we have migration, urbanization, all of this. And if we map that together, the technological revolution, the political environment, what is happening at the society level, we know that we are in an environment that we cannot look backwards. The past is not going to help us about the future, and we have fundamental implications. And also we have also in the insurance market is changing, the distribution. The buyers are changing. The way you buy the insurance, there are many changes, and all of that has an impact on the risk map in the following years. So how do we define emerging risks? These are not current risks. There are many new risks, cybernetic risk, for example, and existing risks that are mutating, that are increasing. I have some examples later. What they have in common is that they are difficult to quantify. It is more a qualitative than quantitative analysis. The other criteria that we use is that it has a large financial impact. On the right-hand side, we see that the most important implication, our industry is numerical industry, but you have to look backwards, but this is less effective. So we need to look ahead and to have some insight. And I think that this is the really importance of this topic. In Swiss Re, we have a department, we have a group of people that are in charge of emerging risks. And there is a process, a structured process, a standardized process, how we identify the risk. What you can see there is the ecosystem. At the end of the day, this group of people have a dialogue with think tanks, with university, with external initiatives, but also internally with our sales force, with adjusters, and it is an ecosystem. And in the core, there is a dialogue about the trends and the risks and the emerging risks. And we do the mapping that you see there. We talk about the probability, if the risk will materialize, and the potential impact. The result, is it positive or negative? Just a negative connotation will not be correct, because risk is our input. It means also an opportunity. Many times what we discover is that we have unrealized opportunities. We have to develop new products. We have to have new distribution channels. And the growth area, the growth potential is enormous. When we talk about the cycle, for example, and here we talk about structure, when we talk about we have a soft market, there is a lot of supply, and but if we see the growth potential, so we can apply this excessive capital and we can apply it with a good return. On the other side, we have a lot of risk, and that has a downside, is a risk for our balance sheet, for the sector, and it has to be controlled. If we do not identify it, we cannot control it. The report, Sonar report, some of you, I think you know the Swiss Re publication. The most known one is Sigma, but this is an annual publication referring only to emerging risk. This publication is being prepared by this team, by the group of people that I just mentioned. It is an annual publication. We started in 2007. This is basically an internal report, a strategic report for company management and to be adjusting strategically, but as of 2013 we're publishing. But when we talk about the partners ecosystem, we can use that report very well in order to structure the dialogue and to disclose the conclusions. And if you want to get into the web page, you can download, and it's available for everyone. In 2018, we published at the end of May, and basically this is a summary that I would like to describe very quickly. Basically, what we see for the future, it's 18 emerging risks. and we divide it in the categories. We have 18 new emerging risks. You see here with the colors, red is a high impact. So in orange, it will be financial impact and mediums, and a lower impact is the green area. That is one category, the financial impact. The other one will be the temporary horizon. We're talking about emerging risk, which are, when we talk about short term, we think that a risk that can take place in the next 2 years. That is the horizontal part on top. And below, these are medium or long-term risk. We're talking about emerging risks. And you see the diversity and the variety of risks. And do not forget that this risk may affect the sector or the insurance companies in different areas. It can be the classical one, portfolio, the technical risk, whether property, auto, or life and health. It may be that this risk will affect these business lines. On the other hand, we can talk about the other side. Many of these risks may affect the financial investment. Or third, it may be simply the administrative part or the operation of insurance company. And I would like to talk about some of these risks. When you see the red part, these are the high impact risks, a high financial impact. On the top, we have two. A short-term risk, it will be geopolitical risks, and also the risk diversification. This is the erosion of risk diversification, but they are linked, interconnected, these two types of risks. Just to show you the variety, we have asbestos, and asbestos, because it is an emerging risk. Asbestos is a known risk. 25 years ago, if I am not wrong, Lloyd's almost went to bankruptcy because of asbestos. In the US, it's $100 billion right now, the risks, and the bill is going up because it's an emerging risk. What has changed and what we are seeing is that the risk environment is changing. We see that in many countries, in many societies, that asbestos risk is not recognized. We see it in the construction material consumption. For that reason, that risk is going to expose the balance sheet of this sector. So you can see the variety. Other is the cyber risk, algorithms. It is an emerging new risk. You see that these are different risks. And we talk about the impact, the timeline, and the area of an insurance company that will be affected. Besides emerging risks, in Sonar, we talk about some concrete trends, and I do not want to get into all details, but these are more concrete trends compared to the macro trends I was talking about. One example is we are in the digital era. The digital era is based on some tangible matters and raw material. I hope it's the same word in Spanish. One example will be cobalt. Cobalt, it is a raw material which is the base of the digital era. And we think that it's very important if we work with that trend towards the availability of these raw material. It is not a risk, an emerging risk, but in the middle or long term, that trend will lead to conflict. now allow me to give you some examples just to illustrate this, and then if you want to go deeper in one of the topics, you can read it in the publication, and there are links also for other sources. We start with some emerging risks, short-term emerging risks that we think that in the next 3 years they may be materialized. I'm talking about the geopolitical risk. As Swiss Re, it has a high financial impact. It has a temporary horizon that is short. It could take place at any time, basically, and the affected areas in the insurance company, basically, it's financial investment and operations, the operating system of an insurance company. What are we meaning when we talk about geopolitical risk? It's the on one hand, we have new players in Asia, in China, in India. These are very powerful actors. We have in a political sphere of Russia, we have proliferation of weapons. That is, there are many stakeholders. We have a multipolar world. So the political and economic balance has become multipolar. We have many more. And at the same time, we see erosion of multilateral institutions. I'm referring to the World Bank, for example, the IMF, the World Trade Organization, but also on the military side, the institutions are they are different than 30 or 40 years ago. If you add this, the nationalism and populism, you have basically the full picture, and this is a picture that is less stable. To these emerging risks that we are referring, we have system shocks. There is a probability of conflict that is much higher than before. There is instability. You can have classical conflict, military conflicts, commercial conflicts that we already have, and that may lead to system shocks. And we think that that may affect the financial markets. And this is one of the biggest institutional investors, and it's affecting really operations. Is simple. We are a reinsurance company. We have many global and regional companies in the sector. And with that instability, legal, political, and regulatory, with that possibility of shocks, that is a great risk for the operations. The second risk, and I'm presenting this in a systematic manner, repeating the impact and what is the affected area. The impact is high. This is what we call the erosion of risk diversification. It's similar to geopolitical risk, but the difference is that this is a slow process. The other one was shocks to the system, but this one is like a slow poison. In the asset management, it's also related to the operation of an insurance company. We are referring to regulation. There are certain trends, natural protectionism, and when we talk about the ecosystem, we're talking about these trends and phenomena. These include political institutions as well. We have the institutions, the regulators of the sector. But what we are seeing when we analyze it systematically is that in the regulation area, we have less liberal environment. market access or access to some risks, regulations for use of reinsurance, the administrative cost of regulation. Globally, we see a trend to a more protectionist regulation. And why will that lead to erosion of risk diversification? As an example, we have Colombia or Chile or the Caribbean islands. If Colombia will have to deal with the earthquake without the free movement of capital, the capital cost for a Colombian investor will be astronomical. It will be too high. Why? Because the risk is enormous and the price for the investor will be too high. So what would happen? So the protection price is higher, financial protection will be impossible, like on the Caribbean islands, for example, and that shows has a reflection of economic growth of the possibility of producing in given countries. That is the danger. If we reduce risk diversification, will increase the price. I said that it's a wide variety of emerging risks. The two that I mentioned are more or less linked, but this one is totally different. We have asbestos, and as I said, is a known risk. What changed is not the risk, it is what follows. What has changed is that some countries and some societies do see the risk. What are they doing? What are not they doing? We saw the use of asbestos has increased in some countries, and for that reason we think that the financial consequences will be of high impact for the sector. We consider this as a high impact. It's a medium or long term because of the type of risks of asbestos. It can take place 30, 40, or 50 years after a person has been exposed to asbestos. The affected areas is civil liability, but also health, life and health. We also have a ramp-up business. If we take existing portfolio and we manage this is seriously affected in portfolios that are being exposed to asbestos. We're talking about asbestos generation, the raw material, the workers that work in mines, that they are continuously exposed to inhale the asbestos fibers, the production of some products that contain asbestos, but also the use in the construction. We have some countries where that use is increasing. And why is it so dangerous? It is dangerous because there is a latent risk. So the time of exposure to the asbestos fiber and the lung cancer, 30, 40, or 50 years for development, where the person doesn't feel anything. For the insurance and reinsurance sector, that means accumulation of exposure, and many people has been exposed, and the insurance policies respond, the exposure is continuous, and that makes it dangerous. It's a human tragedy, asbestos, but it is also a financial cancer for the sector. I want to show you some graphs. The black line is the UK, and we see a temporary line of 1940 to 2012, more than 70 years. And what you can see is the UK. In 1960, they had basically the peak. The consumption of asbestos was the highest, and they realized the consequences, and the consumption went down. The interesting thing is the blue line, that is Brazil. What you can see is that in 1980, in 1995, in 2012, that line is at the same level like in the UK in 1960. The consumption is enormous, and the consequences are going to be the same. The human consequences and financial consequences as well. Also in Colombia is the light blue line, less consumption of asbestos, but it's a continuous consumption. You see the line, a line that has not been altered in the last 40 years. So why is it so dangerous? These are the 50 years that I mentioned, and basically the use of asbestos, and the dark blue line is the number of deaths because of lung cancer. 50 years, a correlation is clear. Obviously, if this happened in the UK, it's going to happen in the region as well. Not only in Latin America, we have it in China, if I'm not wrong, in some countries. But what we see is that asbestos is not a control risk, not because of the risk, but how some societies see risks. I think that I have a few minutes more, so it will be good to talk about the geopolitical aspect or the erosion of risk diversification, asbestos. We can talk about a new risk. This is the algorithm risk. We are in a digital era. We have the big data risk. We have sensors in each car. We have 18 sensors. And these sensors, what do? They receive data and they transmit data through thin-field technology, generating millions of data. What I'm saying about the telemetry, we can talk about the human body, health and life. We have more implants that collect data. We have millions of data. On one hand, you have to collect. On the other hand, you have to interpret the data. You have to make decisions with the data. And who is doing it? Algorithms. And there are economists saying that we are getting into an algorithmic economy because of the importance of decisions and the number of decisions that those algorithms are taking. These are math formulas. Sometimes they say that these are formulas that self-learn, basically. The formula will change automatically in order to adjust. Originally, they said it was fantastic because the decision made by the computer are less subjective than the human decisions, than many times they are biased. With the years, we have noticed that algorithms are not so positive. They have their downside. They are not. I'm going to give you some examples first. The financial trade, the stock exchange, sometimes it's done by algorithm, automated trading. Medical diagnosis, many times it's not physicians, it's algorithms. In the US, Many bank processes, you receive a credit or not, it's not a person or the agent that will decide, it's an algorithm that will do it. In the US, what we have, it's a profiling that will lead to situations such as the population in jail. They can get out or not. Who decides? It's an algorithm that would do the profiling. The probability for this person of making a crime again will be higher than another person. Tools in airlines, we are talking about insurance and reinsurance, and that is the emerging risk. If we talk about telemetry, usually it will identify the risk of a person or a product and rates. It is an example in life, and insurance is the same. It is a common item. What is the risk? Where do we see the risk? Many times when we talk about algorithms, we're talking about intellectual property. That it's the ownership or the property of a company. Algorithms are not transparent. They are opaque. They are not transparent. And they are very difficult to control. And if you look at the dimension that the algorithms have on our daily life, that lack of control is worrisome. The risk is that, are we going to have regulation for that? And I think in October, in the European community, there was a new act for data protection. And they said, we're going to ban all the algorithms that do not correspond to some minimum conditions. It has a first impact. And we're going to see it more. Obviously, the emerging risk is that it's not good to use models if we do not understand them well. That can lead to terrible accidents. Well, I think that with this, I am at the end of my time. Before concluding, I would like once again to talk about the application, the app. If you are interested in that, get into the web page. And we have been talking about 18 emerging risks. I just mentioned 4. There are many links, there are many other sources. And what will be a success for us if you could get in, or your companies could get into that risk dialogue. That is important for us. It is important for the sector. It is important in a world that is changing so much as now. Thank you very much for your attention.